Well, good day. I'm Stephen Ezel, the Vice President of Global Innovation Policy at the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And welcome to our event this morning as we release a new report titled the North American Subnational Innovation Competitiveness Index, which ranks the 92 states and provinces of North America on their competitiveness in the modern knowledge, technology, and innovation-driven global economy. The report is a joint product of member think tanks of the Global Trade and Innovation Policy Alliance, the GTIPA, which is a global network of nearly 45 world-class think tanks who have come together to articulate a positive vision for trade, globalization, and innovation that, if conducted on private enterprise-led, market-based, WTO-consistent rules, we can maximize welfare for the world's citizens. Joining us in developing the report were the Canadian think tank, the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, the Mexican think tank Foundation IDEA, and the San Francisco area think tank, the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. Our run of show today will be that I'll make a brief presentation about the report and then turn it over for discussion with our all-star panel for about 45 minutes before receiving your questions at the end for audience Q&A. Please submit your questions via the Slido application, which you can find at the bottom of the event webpage or on our YouTube stream. So let me introduce our panelists today. Representing Canada, we'll first hear from Mr. Aaron Woodrick, who is Director of the Domestic Policy Program at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Aaron previously served as the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. He holds a BA in Economics from the University of Waterloo and a law degree from Western University. He'll be followed by Mr. Mark Sean, who is the Acting Senior Assistant Deputy Minister for Strategy and Innovation Policy at the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ISED, in the Canadian government. His roles include advancing the Canadian government's macroeconomic policy agenda, supporting the development of horizontal policies, and providing support for regional economic development activities across Canadian provinces. He previously served as Director General in the Market Framework Policy branch at ISED. A Rhodes Scholar, he holds a Doctor's of Philosophy degree in Social Policy from Oxford University. Next, we're delighted to be joined by Mr. Patrick Larkin, who is the Deputy Director of the MassTech Collaborative and Director of the Innovation Institute at MassTech. Massachusetts ranks first in our study, in no part due to the great work MassTech has contributed over the past many decades in developing Massachusetts' technology economy. As we'll hope for Pat, Pat holds a BA in Political Science from Boston University and a law degree from Georgetown. Representing Mexico today will be Carolina Agurto, Director of Foundation IDEA. Carolina has previously worked in the Directorate of Governance and Territorial Organization at the OECD and in the Directorate of International Economy, Competitiveness, and Productivity of the Peruvian Ministry of Economy and Finance. A Fulbright Scholar, Carolina received her master's in public policy from the University of Chicago. After Carolina, we'll hear from Sean Randolph, who is a Senior Director of the Bay Area Council Economic Institute. Sean previously served as President and CEO of the Bay Area Economic Forum and as Director of International Trade for the state of California. Sean holds a law degree from Georgetown, as well as a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Last but not least, pulling all the strands of our conversation together this morning and explaining how North America can become a stronger powerhouse in the global economy, we're delighted to be joined by Mr. Eric Miller, who is President of Rideau Potomac Strategy Group, LLC, where his practice focuses on government affairs, international trade, technology, and geopolitics. Eric previously served as a senior advisor at the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation and as a senior policy advisor with Industry Canada. Eric holds a master's from Carleton University in International Affairs. All right, so I will make a brief presentation of the report and then turn it over to our panel. Pulling up the presentation. Excellent. Okay, so as I noted, our North American Subnational Innovation Competitiveness Index compiles 13 indicators across North America's 92 provinces, grouped into three categories: knowledge, economy, globalization, and innovation capacity. Our knowledge economy indicators include 4: immigration of knowledge workers among North American provinces, workforce education levels, extent of professional, scientific, and technology employment, and manufacturing gross value added per worker. Globalization factors include levels of inward foreign direct investment and a state's extent of high-tech exports. 7 innovation capacity indicators include states' levels of R&D intensity, R&D personnel per capita, patent output per capita, levels of venture capital investment, extent of new business creation, high-speed broadband deployments, and decarbonization, measured in the amount of CO2 emissions per GDP. Okay, so taking our 13 indicators across 92 states and provinces, we find that Massachusetts is number 1, followed by California, Ontario, Maryland, and Washington. Canadian provinces perform extremely well in our study, 3 in the top 10, with British Columbia at 6 and Quebec at 9, joining Ontario at 3. We also, when you look at the composite scores, you find that the leaders really far outstrip others in the innovation economy, with Massachusetts and California really having dominant scores across all these indicators. I also want to note that at the ITIF website, we have built an interactive data visualization dashboard where you can see color-coded maps of how all of the provinces and states fared on these indicators, as well as all the data is available for download for extensive comparative analysis. I also want to thank my former colleague, Luke Descoli, our former economic policy analyst at ITIF, who was the author of this report and developed these data visualizations. Why did we do this report? We think it provides a useful framework for policymakers across North America to look at how they fared on these indicators, which they can use as an opportunity to conduct strength, weakness, kind of opportunity assessments of where they rank relative to peers in these key indicators of innovation. Another very interesting thing about the report is really did show the development of subnational regional innovation ecosystems across North America. For instance, British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon all ranked very close to one another in the rankings, and kind of evidence of a deep kind of production innovation ecosystem that are being developed across North American regions. So it's a really useful tool, we believe, for comparative analysis. I should also note that we're now in the process of extending the data set to include Germany and Italy. So we'll have a North American European report that we'll release at an event in Brussels in late September. Just to highlight a few of the more interesting findings from the report, Canadian provinces really dominated on the indicators relating to share of the labor force with a post-secondary education, as well as share of high-skill foreign-born workers. On both those categories, Canada was in the top 5. So really evidence of the strong education system that Canada has. Interestingly, it was 3 Mexican states, Chihuahua, Baja California, and Tamaulipas, that led all other North American states in exports of high-tech products relative to GDP. Very strong evidence of manufacturing economies, particularly automobiles and steel in some of those states. Perhaps unsurprisingly, leading US states dominated in R&D intensity, led by New Mexico, Massachusetts, Washington, Maryland, and California. But 3 Canadian provinces ranked in the top 5 with regard to the extent of R&D personnel per capita. However, while Canada was strong in R&D personnel, the study revealed a clear gap in patent intensity across North America. So the average US state has 122 patents issued per capita, which is more than double Canada's level and far beyond Mexico's. But that signaled that while Canada is perhaps strong in the extent of R&D personnel, maybe they're not getting as much translation of that into actual, scientific and innovation patent output. Interestingly, as well, BC and Ontario led with regard to levels of foreign direct investment as a share of GDP, actually followed by 3 Mexican states, Zacatecas, Baja, and Tlaxcala. One of the more interesting findings from the report is that North America really does represent a unique production ecosystem in the global economy. We essentially have three nations that form a high-wage, low-wage partnerships, bringing complementary labor forces, infrastructure, innovation capacities, and industry strengths together to create a highly competitive economic region. Certainly, the United States and Canada are real sources of kind of R&D and innovation and science, but that's complemented by a lower wage production environment in Mexico, where relative to the cost structures, especially for labor that are faced in U.S. and Canada, this can be kind of a unique environment to position vis-a-vis Asia as we now look for greater levels of global reshoring and shifting global value chains in the global economy. And there's much more we can do to leverage the complementarity of this ecosystem and to have North America capture a greater global share, especially in manufacturing. Lastly, some policy recommendations that emerged from the report. First, North American states and countries should emulate Canada's R&D tax incentive competitiveness. Canada maintains an overall federal subsidy rate of 19.1% for business investment. That's more than double the U.S. share or amount of 9.5% and much more than Mexico's 3.5%. So Canada clearly leads providing R&D tax incentives for investment. Another recommendation the report makes is that we should have greater collaboration and coordination with regard to the manufacturing or technology extension service programs across North America to enhance SME manufacturing supply chain competitiveness. So in the US, we have MEP, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. Canada has IRAP, the Industrial Research Assistance Program. Mexico has SPIME, which is a subsecretariat for small and medium enterprise businesses. As we try and capture a greater share of global manufacturing production, especially in sectors like aerospace or automobiles, there's opportunity for some of these programs to collaborate on best practices with supporting kind of manufacturing digitalization of SMEs so that we can make them more competitive across integrated regional supply chains. We need to fully implement USMCA digital trade rules. There's still some opportunity to go for Mexico with regard to intellectual property enforcement in the online world. We should also continue to eschew data localization policies, local data storage rules. Unfortunately, some Canadian states and even US cities still have local data storage requirements for health data. We believe that that's not appropriate in a global digital economy. The security of information online is not a function of where data is stored, but it's a function of how secure, what processes and measures are used to store that data securely. We would call upon all North American countries, provinces, and cities to eschew local data storage rules. Lastly, we should align and improve economic indicator data availability among North American states. We were only able to find 13 indicators for which data was commonly available. And so that's something policymakers could work on as well. All right, with that, thank you. And I am going to turn the conversation over to Aaron and Mark from Canada.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you to the ITIF, of course, for putting this index together and inviting the Macdonald-Laurier Institute to participate in developing it and for having me on the panel today. I'm just going to sort of dive in a bit on some of the good news and bad news for Canada from this index. You already touched on some of them. Canadians love a good ranked list, usually because we tend to assume we're going to do fairly well in it. And the good news for us is we do fairly well. And in fact, our four largest provinces, which account for the overwhelming majority of Canada's population, 85% of Canadians live in Ontario, British Columbia, Quebec, and Alberta, and they rank 3rd, 4th, 9th, and 12th in this index. So good news from the top line from a Canadian perspective. In terms of the strengths, one you could call raw materials, and I don't mean physical materials, I mean people. We have a very skilled labor force, as the index shows. And particularly with our immigration system, which is a points-based system that emphasizes things like education level and language fluency, gives us a very skilled labor pool. You combine that with very high education levels. We have a very high proportion of the labor force that has post-secondary education, well over 60% on average, which is compared to 35% in the United States and 23% in Mexico. So a lot of skilled labor to tap in the Canadian labor force. We also do quite well with respect to foreign direct investment, although it's not clear from the index how much of that reflects investment, in particular in real estate. A lot of folks may not know that in Canada, we did not experience the sort of housing crisis in 2008, 2009, and we continue to have very inflated housing costs, which is a serious policy concern here in Canada. So that we may be due for a correction there, because we did not get it in the way that our American friends experienced about 12, 13 years ago. The last real sort of strength, I would say, is the broadband coverage. Obviously, in the innovation economy, having access to the internet, reliable, secure, speedy access is very important. And we have very strong broadband coverage, and in fact have all three top positions in the index in British Columbia, Alberta, and Ontario. In terms of some of the concerns, the things that might be concerning for Canadian policymakers, the value add for workers in manufacturing is relatively weak. Only one province places in the top third of the rankings. The rest are rather middling. Also, patents per million, Canada does not perform very well. In fact, the highest ranking province is lower than almost half American states. So if we take patents as a reliable indicator of innovation, Canada has some work to do there. And then finally, the measure of business birth rate, and startups and new business creation. Canadian provinces do very poorly on that measure. In fact, 6 of the 10 bottom spots are Canadian provinces. No Canadian province ranks higher than 33rd at all. So in terms of entrepreneurship and hanging out your shingle or starting a startup, Canadians could learn a thing or two from our neighbors to the south. So I think the real takeaway is, there's good news and bad news. I would say, to me, the problematic challenge for policymakers is that the places where Canada are strong tend to be things that are more easily addressed by governments, such as infrastructure and education. We already do quite well there. The things where Canada has a challenge, for example, entrepreneurship, cultivating a risk-taking sort of entrepreneurial business culture, that's a little more challenging. That's more of a sort of soft skill. And so it's going to be interesting to see how government can help shape that as we move forward. I'll leave it there. I'd like to turn it over to Mark Sean, who's an old university friend of mine from 20 years ago and has risen much farther than I. He's now the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Mark.
Thanks so much, Aaron, and great to reconnect, and good to see the University of Waterloo fronting well today on the panel. I'll try and just pick up on a few other things that I think are interesting coming out of the index and some of the considerations for the Canadian innovation ecosystem more broadly. First, I'd like to just thank the ITIF and all of the contributors to this great index. I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn from each other and understand opportunities to improve our productivity and competitiveness. And obviously, always better when we've got some zones where we're actually doing quite well. But obviously some zones that as Aaron's already pointed out, we do want to spend some attention. I would note in some cases, especially since I do support both a Minister of Innovation, Science, Industry, but also a Minister for Rural Economic Development, that one of the things that is worthy of kind of noting is that a lot of this concentration of great opportunity is concentrated. So our cities of Toronto and Montreal in the east and Vancouver in the west, obviously have a very significant proportion of the professional, scientific, and technical service jobs that ranked in this. And they also are the net recipients of a very significant portion of our venture capital deals, 58% on the deal side and 70% of dollars. And so I do think we, notwithstanding the fact that it's really great to have subnational data, I think we also just need to make sure that even within the subnational data that we are really looking at the full opportunities that are available, because there is quite a bit in rural Canada as well. Aaron's already spoken to the people side of things. I think, this is an extraordinary area of strength for Canada, but one I think that we actually can't kind of rest on our laurels. So, we do have the most educated population in the world in many cases, with more post-secondary graduates than any other country in the OECD. And we're also seeing that in many cases, including in some great ways on the STEM side. But we also, are seeing some great other highlights, like the Canadian women are also the most educated amongst our OECD peers. Obviously, though, that doesn't make up for the fact that we are still facing a significant amount of skill gaps, particularly in some of the industries that we would actually want to see leading on the productivity and innovation side of this. We've got a very tight labor market at the moment. There's over 900,000 vacancies at the end of 2021, which was up from 500,000 in 2019. And one recent survey actually found that almost 50% of Canadian companies are having difficulty filling jobs. And so obviously, one source of that is continued immigration. We've seen, nearly 4/5 of the $1.8 million population increase in the last 5 years was attributable to new arrivals. And we will continue need to push on high-skilled workers to be able to continue to front our innovation and productivity gains. Obviously, on science and research, the telltale kind of Canadian innovation problem is on full display. Lots and lots and lots of great bench strength, extraordinary capacity for ingenuity and innovation, not necessarily borne out in terms of some of the tangible results of the commercialization of that and the reaping of the rewards from the rents of it. And you can see that either in our patents, or in some cases in terms of some of the value add that actually comes from the net critical inputs, or people in our science. And so I think obviously we've got a lot underway to try and kind of shift that tide. We've had a national intellectual property strategy in place for a number of years. I think it's critical that we continue to place emphasis on ensuring that we actually are generating intellectual property, that companies are savvy in this IP space, but also that they're actually able to maximize those benefits over the long term, which is going to require both scale and ecosystems. We see obviously one exciting program in that space is the continuation of the global innovation clusters. And we do see this as a way of trying to get to scale and allowing for continued collaboration around our innovation ecosystem. And then, I would obviously point to the fact that that's also leading us into a number of other kind of zones that we've put on the policy side. So our longstanding productivity problem, as I noted, we rank 6th in the G7. To put this in perspective, for every hour worked, US employees contributed $19 more to their GDP than Canadian employees did in 2019, which is twice the difference from 1996. And so obviously, that's for a number of reasons. We've not seen a shift in bird since the tech bubble burst, and we continue to be quite low in a number of actual dollars spent on business expenditures on research and development. And that is the rationale for why we're looking at programs like our Canada Digital Adoption Program, and also why the last budget committed to the creation of an innovation agency, which we're in the process of standing up. So all told, I think some really interesting opportunities here. I think we continue to be a great place to do business and a great place to invest. And I think this index continues to highlight some of the zones where we're going to need to put our thumb on the scale, particularly to maximize the rewards of our clear people and skills resource, and also to make sure that we're actually getting to scale in an innovation economy. So big thanks, and with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the work of both you and Aaron, the insights that you provide on what's going on in Canada. Let me begin by thanking the Foundation, really, for the extraordinary role it plays in providing reliable information and actionable recommendations on how to accelerate growth in our innovation economies. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts is always proud to be a top performer in your competitiveness analysis. And more importantly, we're grateful for the roadmap you provide us to work on our areas of improvement. Having been involved in economic development in Massachusetts, focused on its innovation economy for more than close to 30 years now, it really is a humbling experience to be participating in the recognition that you've bestowed on the state of Massachusetts today. We truly are blessed with the innovation assets in our region, I often state, as an economic development practitioner in the state, the first operating protocol for engaging in economic development is to do no harm. We are fortunate with renowned network of private and public research institutions that are at the cutting edge of discovery in almost any discipline you can imagine. We do have a very well-educated workforce. 47.6% of our workforce have bachelor degree or beyond, which is the top ranking in all of the states, leading technology states, and well above the national average. And of course, our firms attract capital from across a full spectrum of funding sources. It really is a great time to be engaged in the innovation economy in Massachusetts. I will say, however, it hasn't always been a bed of roses in the state. I vividly remember earlier in my career, the publication of the book Regional Competitiveness by Harvard Business School professor Annalee Saxenian. Annalee asked why it was in the 90s that businesses in California's Silicon Valley flourished, while along Route 128 in Massachusetts, it declined. The answer, she suggests, had to do with the fact that despite similar histories and technologies, Silicon Valley had developed a decentralized but cooperative industrial system, while Route 128 came to be dominated by independent, self-sufficient corporations. In those days, Massachusetts' innovation economy was heavily reliant on firms like Data General, Prime Computer, Digital Equipment, Lotus, and Wang, vertically integrated companies completely fixated on the mini computer industry. While the trademark Yankee ingenuity and independence of the executive ranks in these companies brought them great financial rewards, it was those same insular traits that contributed to a blindness of the shifts from mini computer and mainframes to personal computers. Annalee's book, along with the realities on the ground, tagged the state in those days with the reputation that Massachusetts lacked the collaborative gene. As certain as I am of the truth of that declaration in the 90s, I am equally certain that Massachusetts has come full circle and is deeply engaged in the hard work of collaboration and partnerships at every level. The necessities caused by the recession in the 90s and the demise of these tech giants caused individuals and institutions across the landscape to think differently and act differently towards its innovation economy. A new model of cluster-based economic development emerged on the landscape, headed by Harvard Business School professor Michael Porter. The first state pilot for this model was in the 90s when Professor Porter noticed in his research a yet undefined cluster of medical device firms camouflaged within what we then defined as precision manufacturing, metal and plastic firms. Working closely with my organization, the MassTech Collaborative, we organized leaders from across these eclectic sectors. This convening, along with Professor Porter's report describing the characteristics of this cluster, gave life and identity to a newly defined medical device industry sector in the state. We learned right then, the power of collaboration. At that time, Congress was amidst reauthorization of the Food and Drug Administration, and the state's largest medical device firm, Boston Scientific, had been months seeking audience with then senior senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy. Unsuccessful on their own, Boston Scientific partnered with members of the newly formed medical device cluster to develop consensus positions on FDA reauthorization. Recognizing the strength of collaboration, the senator met with cluster leaders and everyone, including Boston Scientific, benefited from friendly rules around FDA reform. This cluster-based economic development model has replicated itself hundreds of times across the landscape in Massachusetts and has contributed to a change in culture that continues into this day. The centerpiece of the model is the collaboration of key stakeholders from within state, industry, university, nonprofit, in financial sectors, each with a shared interest in building a supportive ecosystem that all parties can benefit from. It is through the curated dialogues and objective analysis that takes place within state-sanctioned collaborations that policymakers, both public and private in Massachusetts, have developed programs and initiatives to improve the competitiveness of the state's innovation economy. The often cited 10-year, $1 billion Massachusetts Life Sciences Initiative, announced more than 10 years ago by then Governor Deval Patrick, was spawned from close to 3 years of work by members of the Massachusetts Life Sciences Collaborative. Shortly after establishing Life Sciences, the state organized a Mass Tech Hub Collaborative to look at ways to improve competitiveness of the state's general technology sector. This led to programs like Growing Companies to Scale, a highly successful mentorship initiative, the launch of new state-supported internship program, and other talent marketing and technology initiatives. And more recently, the state has been supporting focused collaborations with stakeholders from the FinTech, robotics, and advanced manufacturing sectors. Multiple projects are spinning out from these efforts. Today, the Commonwealth is a far cry from where it was in the 90s. Today, you will find a commitment, almost a celebration of the role of entrepreneurs in our economy. This shift was inspired through seed investments in organizations like Mass Challenge, a successful global business competition and accelerator, and Entrepreneurship for All, an accelerator program helping underrepresented individuals successfully start their businesses. These are not state chartered initiatives. This is the state making seed investments in organizations that are taking the lead and driving the vision for economic growth. The quality and number of these organizations is truly awe-inspiring. Groups like Greentown Labs, a climate tech startup incubator, Mass Digital Games Institute, supporting entrepreneurship and strengthening talent pipelines, Hack Diversity, equipping high-performance Black and Latinx talent to launch careers within tech and innovation. There are literally hundreds and hundreds more organizations supporting a diverse and dynamic tech and innovation ecosystem. This bottoms-up approach to identifying unmet needs in the economy and the unique partnerships that are organized to address these needs is now standard operating procedure in Massachusetts. Today, the Commonwealth leverages this dynamic at a scale unheard of in the days of the mini-computer. It has responded with tools and initiatives to support industry-led innovation across the board. We've discussed the $1 billion Life Sciences Initiative. The current Baker-Polito administration early on championed a $100 million initiative to support technology institutes and advanced manufacturing. They've reauthorized life sciences at the level of $623 million, and they've pooled close to $300 million in ARPA funds and other resources for training support. And they reauthorized a program we manage called the Collaborative Research Matching Grant Program, $90 million to support collaboration between universities and industries in Massachusetts. Just recently, this administration introduced an economic development bill that offers $337 million in bond support for investment in multiple sectors, from defense, digital health, cybersecurity, robotics, and more, and proposed an additional $750 million to invest in the state's clean tech industry to address climate change. These types of efforts are not top-down gambles by the state to stake claims in the latest emerging technology opportunities. They are initiatives that have earned their status through deep collaboration and industry engagement with the state, which by definition aligns with the existing strengths in the Commonwealth's innovation economy. These kinds of initiatives, along with a friendly business environment and standards for quality of life that many consider second to none, makes Massachusetts an extremely appealing ecosystem for individuals to establish their careers and to build their enterprises. So with that, I would just like to thank the foundation for the honor bestowed on the state of Massachusetts today, and for all the insights and support that you provide all the ecosystems in North America to improve their performance. And so that with that, I would like to turn the program over to Carolina.
Thank you, Patrick, and also thank you to the ITIF. So as Fundación IDEA is one of the main think tanks in public policy here in Mexico, we've been working with the ITIF within this alliance, the GTIPA. And so I think that all the contributions and all the products that we were working on since we started this alliance have been a good reference to not only for the US and for Canada in this case, but also especially for Mexico and some policymakers. So I don't want to just repeat what Stephen said about the ranking, and I encourage everyone to look at the report and also to play a little bit with information that we have there. But I want to just complement a little bit about like what is not in the report, and maybe gives a more broad context about what is happening here in Mexico, and perhaps will help to understand why, in comparative terms to some states in the US and in Canada, Mexico is where it is. So first, the first idea I want to highlight here is that we have to understand that Mexico, we can find different types of Mexico within Mexico. And so the challenges that we have at the local levels here right now are very different if we compare states, especially if we compare the states that are in the north and states that are in the south. When we talk about the states that are in the north, we can see like Nuevo León, which is one of the, right now in the ranking, is one of the states that highlights the most in this index. We can find that alongside with Nuevo León, we can find other states that are very well positioned in some of the sub indicators because they are next to the border. And that's something I want to highlight, because when we talk about taking advantage of the USMCA, we have to think like how to integrate, more these states. But then when we see the southern states, we can see like the challenges are very different. Other states in the south, we find that there is a big challenge regarding education, schooling, regarding the access of basics like access to health, and also we can find like in the south, and also states near Mexico City, we can find like there are problems with the regarding security, and all of these challenges are also problems if we want to boost competitiveness in all the states in Mexico. So that's the first idea, and that posed a big a big challenge for government and also for stakeholders, because of course you cannot set a comprehensive and a unique policy to boost competitiveness, because you have to tackle, these specific challenges of the states. But something that is very common right now, I think, in all the states, and this is maybe one of the second idea I want to highlight, is that across the country, we are finding that one of the major challenges, and it is very important to consider if we want to boost competitiveness, increase productivity in all the country, is labor. So human capital right now in all the country, it's one of the biggest challenges, not only because of the number people that are able to work. But the challenge is to tackle and to understand the characteristics of this labor force. We can see that we find across the country a labor force that is incomplete, a labor force that is informal, a labor force that even is not it doesn't have like a like like a skilled plant, so it can be easily taken advantage of from the private sector. So that's a big problem, and it's a problem I think that is across the country. And of course, I think that could pose a challenge if we want to also think about how to take advantage of the USMCA, how to integrate the states, not only the border states, but also like other states like Mexico City, for example, which is one of the most competitiveness is one of the most competitive states right now, also here in Mexico. So what we can find also is this is the third idea, is like, of course, we're seeing the Nuevo León highlighting in the index, but also we don't have to forget about two other states that I think need a special mention here, which are Mexico City, which is now is treated like an state, and also Guadalajara. And I want to highlight this because these two states, alongside with Nuevo León, are good examples of how articulating stakeholders at the local level you can achieve better results, right? Right now, if we can see, if we analyze Mexico City and we analyze also Jalisco, the capital is Guadalajara, we can see like that we can find like clusters and hubs that are very interesting if we want to also consider them as hubs that we want to connect them with other industries in the US and also Canada. So that's another big idea, right? So taking into account all of these challenges, we have like, we can talk about like a lot of like recommendations here. I don't want also to repeat what just Steven said at the beginning, but of course, for us, for Mexico, I think the USMCA is a good, it's something that must be a priority right now to take advantage of it, not only because of the trade influx that we are since the NAFTA we'll be having with the US and Canada, but also because it's a good challenge to talk about other stuff. For example, how to improve the competition environment, how to also take advantage of technology, everything that is right now in chapters of regarding 5G and so forth. I think those are interesting chapters that the USMCA, at least from the side of Mexico, would be a good opportunity for us. The second recommendation and the second idea here is that we also have to align foreign support to local priorities. So as I mentioned before, we can find, again, different types of Mexico within Mexico. And right now, the federal government has lowered all their support to programs that are related to the SMEs, to improve productivity, to also innovation. I think that's one of the topics that we haven't heard a lot in the past years, and that's a big problem. So, but also since we are Mexico as a country is very well localized to consider it as a good partner for global change of value. There are a lot of right now financial aid programs, especially from the US. There are right now, I think, a good opportunity for the country to take advantage. So there are like two special programs. One will be focused on this, on how to integrate local industries to also global change of value. And there's another big program about how to also improve skills within the labor force in the South. So those two things I think could be a good opportunity also to improve competitiveness, especially for those states that right now are in a disadvantaged position. Another thing, the third idea is to continue improving or boosting stakeholder articulation with a local focus, of course, for creating self-sustainable hubs and clusters. So again, since the government has not played a good role, in boosting innovation, economic development, I think it's very important to continue forcing or to continue creating these opportunities to articulate stakeholders. And when we talk about this articulation with the stakeholders, I think this is beyond just articulating public sector, with the private and public sectors. It's also to incorporate academia here. I think that we also highlight this in the report, that how important it is to universities, for example, to be involved if we are talking about labor force and improving skills. So I think that's something also that we need to boost here. And we've seen, I think Sean will talk about a little more about this, but we've seen good results when triple helix collaborations are put into place especially in at the local level, right? And we see like even though there are almost none federal programs supporting clusters and supporting SMEs, which is like more than 90% of the type of industries or enterprises here in Mexico. Articulating these local hubs have been having a great impact in how to connect with other hubs in the US especially. So I think Sean will talk about a little more about that. And the last idea, and is again, I'm sorry to highlight this, but I think it's very important, labor force. So of course that we need to improve quality of our education system. I think in the last 2 years, we've seen challenges in the educational reform here in Mexico. But again, it's more than just think about education as basic education. We've seen that, for example, when I was mentioning Ciudad de Mexico, Mexico City, and Guadalajara, Jalisco, Guadalajara, we've seen that even though they are like in comparative terms, in relative terms to other states, they are like in a better position than other states in terms of education. The key factor for them to create hubs, for example, regarding software and IT, is because it's not because of the educational basic system. It's because of other programs that are aimed to improve and to improve these skills in people, and they're again beyond the basic school system. So I think doing that, we will see like a labor force that is going to be better prepared to also be integrated, in these plans or these projects that can result from all the collaboration within the USMCA, for example. So I think those are my highlights, and I think I can also I think Sean is over there. And Sean, I don't know if maybe you can comment about this, but we've seen like Nuevo León, and I think it's not only Nuevo León as a state is not only highlighting in this index. Recently, like 2 months ago, there was another index released here in Mexico, and where it compares again states, but in other in considering other indicators. And we've seen that Nuevo León right now also is leading all the states in Mexico. And even though it's a state that is focused on industry, manufacturing, and we are seeing also telecom as one of the major sectors developing there. We'll see that this has a relationship, a very close relation, and linked with the fact that they're being, working towards improving the skills, also improving the relationship with the U.S., and I think that's very, very, very important. And so I think that maybe you can also expand a little bit about the hubs and all of that we've seen, especially with Nuevo León and Baja California, I think.
Great. Thanks very much, Carolina. And I think our audience will see a lot of connection between these different presentations. And I want to thank you, Stephen, also, before we get going, for through GTIPA pulling all this together. I think the Global Trade and Policy Alliance and Innovation Alliance is really a unique platform for pulling together these different kind of views and experiences from different countries. So a great contribution. I'm going to give a bit of a perspective from Silicon Valley, and I think the way that we look at it is that the Valley really is a global innovation and technology platform that connects technology companies and startups from around the world and different innovation hubs. And thinking about what our friends in Massachusetts were saying, and I've got to say, we actually are looking very closely at some of the really great things Massachusetts has done around life science and can learn from that. I think one thing that we're very good at is technology commercialization. The level of patent production per capita just blows the roof off anything, much, much higher than in bigger places like Los Angeles or New York. So, and I think that capacity to translate research and technology development into commercial products and then into global markets at scale is really what draws so many companies and startups and investors into the Valley. So over the years, our institute has looked really carefully at our international relationships and what makes each one unique and how and why other innovation clusters around the world connect to Silicon Valley and how we connect to them. And that includes both Canada and Mexico in recent years. And I think what we found in our work aligns very closely with what this report is saying. And one little distinction I would probably make, and I think it does come out in the report, is when we're looking at states and provinces, at the end of the day, we're usually looking at cities and regions where this activity clusters. So for example, you can have Jalisco in Mexico, a very, very large state, but the technology and innovation activity is really quite densely clustered in the sort of greater Guadalajara area. So there's sort of a prism there looking at states, but also what are the clusters within states. In California, for example, Silicon Valley is huge, but you have really important clusters in Los Angeles around UCLA, San Diego around UC San Diego, but very little in the Central Valley. So it's quite uneven. I think any state or province we look at, it's going to be uneven anywhere in North America. But looking at Canada, as I said, what we saw in our work was very similar to what we're seeing in this report, with a lot of government leadership. So the creation in recent years of superclusters across Canada designed to attract and really facilitate both public and private investment in education and research and entrepreneurship. Baja California, a supercluster around British Columbia, a supercluster around digital technology. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba around protein industries, food, Ontario, advanced manufacturing, Quebec, AI-powered supply chains, Atlantic Canada, things related to the ocean. And within Canada, again, where do the strongest connections happen for us? It's very, very heavily to Toronto and adjacent Ontario. And there have been really strong initiatives in Toronto, like the Toronto Discovery District, a major cluster in downtown Toronto, the Mars Discovery District within that, enabling entrepreneurs. Lots of focus in Toronto and Ontario around AI, very strong, cyber, blockchain, big data analytics, fintech, cyber tech. And a lot of our Silicon Valley companies have established their Canada headquarters in Toronto. Alphabet, Cisco, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Salesforce is there very, very heavily. And an important part of that is the Toronto-Waterloo corridor, which really anchors the R&D system and really one of the world's leading centers around AI, which is very important for us. And most of our leading venture capital companies from Silicon Valley have a significant footprint in Canada, but especially in Toronto and Ontario. We see these other important clusters, again, Quebec, aerospace for a long time, been multimedia, gaming, especially around Montreal, British Columbia, around Vancouver, lots of video, online game development, clean tech, quantum computing, again, digital supercluster there. So when we look at the connection with Canada, there's this healthy back and forth between these provinces and these cities with Silicon Valley. I think they're drawn to us in particular because of the scale of the US market, the depth of technology that's available in the Valley, the global marketing platform that it presents. And that, I think when our companies are looking at Canada, they're seeing lots and lots of talent. As we were hearing earlier, lots of highly educated people, lots of engineers, a lot of diversity, proximity, and lower costs. And I think that's one of the Achilles heel for us here. We are extremely expensive. We're probably the most expensive place in the US to live and to hire employees and engineers. And I think although it's probably not cheap, I think Canada really presents an attractive environment in terms of the talent. So if we look at Mexico, it's kind of a different story, but I think a fascinating story. And from that perspective, our feeling was that the national government in Canada really isn't being terribly helpful these days. It doesn't seem to be a big priority to develop entrepreneurship and tech-led growth. But we are seeing a lot of focus on this in key states and in key cities in particular. And that would be kind of starting along the border of Baja California, around Tijuana and Mexicali, Chihuahua, around Juarez, Nuevo León and Monterrey, Jalisco, with Guadalajara, Mexico City, and the state of Mexico. And then some interesting clusters, early stage, but they're getting their act together around central Mexico, the manufacturing heartland, El Bajío, several states there, and some interesting activity happening in Yucatan around Merida. And I think what characterizes all of these places is at some level there is a focus by the local governments, the city governments and the state governments on enabling this to happen. That it's important and working to invest and support industry and get together with industry and universities. So when we look at this particular landscape, we're seeing Mexico City, obviously the seat of national government, many of the top universities, most of the venture capital is concentrated there. And I just share the figures here about the value of venture investment in Mexico. 70% is in Mexico City, 3.6% in Jalisco, 2.3% in Nuevo León, the state of Mexico, almost 20%, Querétaro in El Bajío, 0.7%. So you can really see this concentration of venture capital in Mexico City, which is also building its digital capacity. And that's also, by the way, where the lion's share, or a very, very large share of FDI coming into Mexico is going, and it's also home to a very large number of Mexico's leading and fast-growing startups. If we flip over to the border area, say to Tijuana and Juarez, we're seeing, as the report says, really large manufacturing sectors, bi-national economies connected very closely to the U.S. Nascent startup systems. I think the folks in Chihuahua are doing a very good job of trying to build up their startup innovation system. I think both Tijuana and Juarez, so Baja California and Chihuahua, have a focus, but I think Chihuahua in particular, on trying to move up scale in R&D, adding more value added, bringing that into its already large manufacturing base. And we see something similar in Monterrey and Nuevo León. very large manufacturing base, the need to bring that upscale with more value-added activity, more locally based R&D. But there's this enormous advantage in Nuevo León that it's sort of the corporate industrial center for Mexico. Lots of engagement by the leadership of the business community in Nuevo León, and then key institutions like the University Tec de Monterrey, which is really the #1 entrepreneurially focused university in Mexico with campuses all across the country, and a whole range of initiatives in Nuevo León to connect the universities with startups, with industry leaders. And it's not surprising that's also a major location for venture capital. Guadalajara, I guess you could say, it's a technology capital in Mexico, over 1,000 technology companies, 150,000 workers. I think what's really interesting there is, going back decades, the government and industry and universities have worked closely together. A lot of manufacturing was hollowed out when China joined the WTO. They had to regroup, figure out what to do. Ever since then, I think we could attribute some of the success in Jalisco to the capacity and interest of those three sectors to actually work together. And I think reflecting that, we're seeing lots and lots of tech startups in Guadalajara, and lots of Silicon Valley companies. Oracle and Intel, for example, have major R&D centers there. And it's not just simple R&D. These are global R&D hubs that connect to the best R&D hubs around the world, and it's happening in Mexico. Finally, I would say just Yucatan and El Bajío, which I mentioned earlier, El Bajío being a cluster of several states, a heavy industrial capacity, but their governments are also looking to collaborate together on how they can bring the quality of manufacturing up further, how they can support more innovation-led growth, more startups. They have very business-friendly policies. So that's something to watch. And Yucatan, it's very small still, but in the city of Mérida, they're looking to develop Mérida as an offshore IT center. And again, they're working with a good university base and a lot of focus by the government. So I think the common threads here are, these are states, and within the states, particular cities and regions where the government have determined that this is entrepreneurial-led growth, innovation, technology as a basis for economic growth is going to be a priority, that they're going to support it, they're going to have the right policies, and they're going to work together with universities and with industries to accelerate that process. And a key thing, as we're looking, say, from Silicon Valley, is the engineering base. It's the quality and the quantity of the engineers available. And I think we're seeing in these locations across Mexico a high production of engineering graduates, but also a high quality of engineering graduates where you can grow those people within these companies. And I think that in turn is leading to production of a lot of new startups across Mexico. So if there's a couple of things that I think are important for the future for these states and cities, and again, I think this is going to be where the action is going to be for quite a long time to come in these particular states and cities. It's going to be how to accelerate entrepreneurial-led growth, homegrown startups that become unicorns or bigger than that accelerate employment in their fields, that kind of replicate what has happened in Silicon Valley and elsewhere by the creation of new companies that are technology-based. And the other aspect of it that's important, especially for the manufacturing centers, and that would be in Nuevo León, Chihuahua, and Baja California, but also Jalisco too, would be to increase the amount of the value of R&D, increase value added in the R&D, or rather in the manufacturing sector, which are really foundational to those economies. So they're not only drawing on more engineers and high quality engineers, but they're also attracting more investment because of their capacity to do advanced R&D locally, which will tie them in more deeply with North American supply chains. So quite a few challenges as we look at Mexico compared to the US or Canada, but a lot of sort of good material, a lot of good policies, and a good foundation to work from in a number of these key Mexican states and cities. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Sean, and good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you to ITIF for having done the very hard work of putting together this important index. And so my job is to offer some cross-cutting themes and to help to put this all together. And so I guess the first observation I would give is that this is a very useful exercise. It's important for political leaders, community leaders, and business leaders in subnational jurisdictions across North America to see where they stand up next to their peers, where they rank, because part of the process of building a competitive economy is thinking about competition and innovation as something which is important and integral to what they do. And so having data points around that is something that is extraordinarily useful, because so much of the innovation and competitiveness impetus comes often at the subnational level. So when you look at the report and you look at some of the common themes and things we've heard today, number one area that was mentioned on many fronts was access to talent. And this is something which is really, really important. And there's both some very positive signs in North America, and there's also some worrying signs. And so on the positive side, we have seen, for example, in Canada, very good systems of developing workers. Canada has an extraordinarily high level of people who've completed secondary education, who've got technical skills, and there's a great talent base available. Canada has also worked very, very hard on getting its immigration system right, the so-called express entry system, which allows key workers to come in quickly and to establish themselves in the country in a really rapid time frame, has proven repeatedly a great driver of inbound investment into Canada, because companies can know that they can get the workers they need when they need them, even if they're not all locally available. Certainly in the US and Mexico, education is something which I think is a challenge. I mean, one of the things I honestly work at or some of the reporting look at or some of the reporting in the US around teachers leaving the profession and rethinking what secondary education looks like. And certainly the cost of higher education is something which is important to look at in the US as medium term competitiveness factors and what that all looks like. But one of the key themes that you get from each of the top 10, top 15 jurisdictions is that they are by and large all welcoming of outsiders. And so people can move from another part of the country or from another part of the world and set up in California or in Ontario or in Vancouver or in Massachusetts, and they can feel welcome. There is little hostility toward having people move from elsewhere to come in and get settled. And I think that welcoming environment is something that is extraordinarily important. And this gets us back, of course, to the discussions around immigration, temporary entry, and the need to recognize that businesses do need to get people into particular jurisdictions if their investments are to be successful in those jurisdictions. There's even been some research that I've heard about that has looked at firms who build teams around particular individuals. And so, for example, if X person is able to work in New York City, then they will build the team out in New York City. But if they're not, then they'll build the team in London or Toronto or somewhere else. Another factor when you look at the report is that each of the top performers are all linked very strongly to what I guess you could call name brand universities or research institutions. I guess the one jurisdiction in the top 10 which isn't linked to a major university that ranks globally would be New Mexico, but of course they have Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is an extraordinary driver of innovation in that part of the United States in a variety of areas. And so ensuring a strong, well-supported university ecosystem is something that is crucially important, because it's the ability for students to come in, learn skills, make connections, build relationships, and take what they've learned and add connections to them that allows them to spin out businesses that is extraordinarily important. And so a common factor is having a top tier university system. And so as a public investment, that is something that is extraordinarily important. We also see, when you look across the landscape, the value of getting the policy right. And that can be both the policy by the federal government and also by the state and provincial governments. And so Sean mentioned, for example, the interesting work going on in Guadalajara. And right before the pandemic, I went to Guadalajara and saw the very interesting ecosystem at work there. A lot of that is attributable to local business leaders working in conjunction with the state government and others. That's an example of where policy matters, but it does also matter that perhaps one could say that the federal government in Mexico is perhaps less focused on building an innovation and competitiveness ecosystem than it might necessarily need to be. Now, we also heard a mention of the superclusters in Canada. This is something which is really important in a Canadian context, because it attempts to solve the core challenge of businesses not necessarily working together. So it sets up a common theme or a common challenge, and then it brings people together to work on that set of challenges. And the government, by putting the funding in, is able to provide structure and incentives around how that collaboration would work. And certainly, I think that that model would work not only in Canada, but in other jurisdictions where you see the need to try to build these linkages a little bit more strongly. And this, of course, goes to the question of economies of scale. When you're looking at how Canada, the US, and Mexico compare, one does see the difference in economies of scale. So, taking the Canadian context, I recall once taking a course in Canadian foreign policy where the professor said that Canada is a regional power without a region, because its region is North America and the US is the global superpower. So, if it were Australia, it might be more dominant in its part of the world than it is in North America. So Canada is invariably smaller in scale when compared to the United States. And that relative scale pushes Canada to be, I think, a lot more focused on its policy framework. It has to work harder for every dollar that it needs to get, simply because the scale of innovation and the scale of markets are not quite as large. Now, certainly, Mexico, in the same way, has a smaller scale than the US market. But the flip side of that is that sitting next to perhaps the world's richest market in many, many sectors is something that is an extraordinary advantage. But having a major mega market next to you does actually shape how the linkages of innovation and research flow. Invariably, there is a certain desire to build connectivity with that larger market. And so figuring out how to build those linkages in such a way that you leverage the best advantages of scale, well, perhaps ensuring that the ecosystem at home in either Mexico or Canada remains strong, is certainly a policy challenge. And a lot of this will also come down to how do you build linkages between, say, cities, where much of the innovation ecosystem action has taken place, and rural areas. And one of the things, of course, that I would say is a huge advantage of the US ecosystem is not only the entrepreneurial spirit, the deep base of venture capital, the strong policy framework on intellectual property, but things like the Department of Defense research spending through DARPA and other agencies, and certainly the National Institutes of Health on healthcare and pharmaceutical development. Having this scale of federal support for innovation is something that is hugely important. And looking at what can be learned and scaled for other market sizes is something that is extraordinarily important. I think it's also important as we think about how do we build a more innovative North America. We obviously need to think about the thing which ties our economies together, and that is USMCA. And so we have a 6-year review that will be coming in 2026. Much of that is premised on how do we ensure that the agreement continues and how do we ensure that there are as few changes as possible. But I also think that it's important that we start asking the question of how do we build a stronger digital chapter? What else can we be doing in the agreement to ensure that our framework stays updated and stays very vibrant? And so if you look at the digital chapter, for example, there's very little beyond best endeavor clauses that are said about cybersecurity. Well, do we need to have a discussion if we are building digital businesses around a protocol for how we deal with cyber risk and cyber attacks and information sharing and things of that nature? And so part of it is to think through of what do we want USMCA post 2026 to look at, and not only treat the 6-year review as a threat, but also as an opportunity to make the changes that we need to make. When it comes to the question of the future, certainly we are looking at a whole variety of interesting developments in sectors from quantum technologies, AI, robotics, biotech, and the integration of all of those pieces together, which are, I think, really interesting. And there are great examples of companies in different parts of North America who are working on that. One of the areas of policy which I've been quite live to is the discussion about how Canada and the US can work together on the quantum front. And so the US is working now to build out a workable quantum internet by 2030. Is there an opportunity for Canada to work on that, to take some of the technology challenges on that particular front, and so that we can find a way to leverage the best advantages that each can bring to the table? And this requires really focused work on on ensuring that we're getting the best in both of our countries, both at the research and the firm level, to work together. A couple of other short notes, and then I will wrap up. First, I do think that looking into the future, one of the things that we can think about is how do we build out a deeper pool of tech talent. And so much of this discussion around tech talent is how do we get more entrepreneurs, or sorry, get more engineers. But one of the questions that comes up is, are there people that can do basic coding, remediation, support, things of that nature? And so in essence, we are taking the supply chain model that we've seen in manufacturing in North America and thinking more closely around how we do that in services, and what would be the educational foundations that we would need to give folks in, say, Mexico to be able to better integrate digitally into the North American innovation ecosystem, much like products are sent to Mexico for finishing and sent back to the rest of North America. The last point that I would make is that we need to think broadly about innovation, not just as digital technologies, but also about natural resources. So one of the things that you see in the forestry sector, for example, is all sorts of interesting uses of forest products that are being made into everything from textiles to cosmetic products to ping pong balls and things of that nature, as well as being used to power the green economies and things of that nature. And so asking how do we see the traditional resource base that exists in many parts of our economies, and saying, how do we get more innovation out of that? I think we need to put aside this old dichotomy of old economy, new economy, and say, one, every company in North America is now a data company. And two, whether you're in resources or whether you're in insurance or whether you're in financial services or whether you're developing handsets, you're a technology company. And so I think thinking through about how do we push innovation out more deeply into non-traditional or sectors that are not perceived as being innovative is something that's extraordinarily important. And with that, I'll leave you with the story that one of the best suppliers of underground mining drones is from Philadelphia, where there's not a lot of mines in Philadelphia, but its products are being deployed in mines in the US and beyond to do work in areas of mines that would otherwise be dangerous for humans. And this all spun out of the University of Pennsylvania and is yet but one example of how the North American innovation ecosystem is working and is helping to make mining, in this case, of a critical metal more competitive. So with that, I'll stop and happy to take questions.
Well, excellent, Eric, and all of our panelists. Thank you so much for those rich and enlightening remarks. Really appreciate it. Want to remind the audience, we have about 10 minutes for questions, which you can submit through the Slido application. Want to start by just asking if there is anything that you've heard from one of your fellow panelists that you would like to comment or expand upon, or that you thought was really interesting and enlightening. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I enjoyed Sean's commentary on the benefits of some of the large tech firms literally locating in Toronto and kind of the synergies that exist in the innovation economy by that proximity. We see a lot of that in Massachusetts. We have the benefit of many West Coast firms that have literally located in the proximity of the Boston, Cambridge area, everything from Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple. And it really does, energize both ecosystems. And so I think that movement of human capital through these enterprises, we see it in the life sciences sector as well, is a good driver and one that we should all welcome and not shy away from.
And we see venture firms being active both in Boston and the Bay Area and other places too. I think these are two of the major pulls.
Mm-hmm. Eric, the Biden administration has talked extensively about reshoring, trying to get more, reshoring of manufacturing production back to the United States from places like China. We also hear the term friendshoring or nearshoring being used as well. Is this the right way to think about these challenges in a shifting global economy? Should we think about reshoring to North America? And what's the Canadian view on these types of questions?
So the term friendshoring always bothers me because, I think we're going to be seeing some bad breakup dramas from high school and things of that nature. So, but the thing on nearshoring that I think about is that, one, people move to Asia for very rational economic reasons. So if they're going to move out of Asia, they need rational reasons. And they may leave China, but they're going to go to Vietnam because Vietnam is a highly competitive, great place to do business. It's very welcoming of investment. So if you want nearshoring, you do need to put in place a series of policy and financial incentives to help to at least defray the cost of the move. And the other thing that I don't see from this administration, and it's not evident anywhere, is an effort to help to get those firms established in places where they might land. So if I've been producing in China for 20 years, and now I want to move to Jalisco, to Guadalajara, do I know anybody in Jalisco? Where do I put myself? Do I know the tech park operators? Do I know the manufacturing center operators? So there's no effort to try to link it all together. And a lot of that takes time, effort, and money. And so it's great to say this, but at this point, there's no connectivity with parks where they might land on the other side, whether in Mexico or in Central America. And there's no financial support. And the Japanese, the Taiwanese, and others who've encouraged people to leave China have all put real money behind that effort. And what we've seen so far from the administration is encouragement without either tax incentives or direct subsidies.
Go ahead, Carlita.
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna expand a little more about what just Eric said, and also something that also Sean mentioned. So I think, of course, we're seeing from the Mexican perspective, we're not seeing, a big support or a clear policy about, soft landing in these hubs, even though we have like good and promising hubs and clusters. For example, we talk about, again, Guadalajara, IT, no? And I think, for example, if we want to talk about the future, I mean, for Mexico, I think all the digital economy, it's a good thing to take advantage of, but there is no clear policy from the federal government about soft landing, making these connections. When I said about articulating all the stakeholders, it's a big challenge. Could be like very easy to say, oh yeah, let's connect people, but it's very complicated because first there is no federal policy, and then we need to go to the local governments. And here in Mexico, we're talking about state and municipal governments that they don't have resources. They don't have resources, and at certain point, the success of these hubs and these clusters is mainly because there was a good, intention from local governments, but they again relied on resources from universities, private, especially private universities, or even private companies, or private investment. Sean mentioned about venture capital. I think venture capital, of course, in Mexico City has been great in relative terms of other states, and we've seen that. I mean, we thought that during the pandemic we will see, even though we had an inflation rate like right now, not seen ever before, but also we saw that GDP was going down, but we also saw right now, after seeing some figures from last year, for example, that the diversification of the economy at the local level have been, growing. And right now we're seeing like more than 90, I think it's 900 economic sectors present right now in Mexico City, which is compared to the national average is like 700. So it's a lot, and we didn't see that coming because of the pandemic. But if you go inside of that information, that data, we are seeing that most of those changes, positive changes, are being driven by in firms and SMEs, the entrepreneurial ecosystem linked to digital economy. So again, so we're seeing like this is something that we know that is around, but there is no clear policies, and there is no clear as something that you can consider as sustainable. And of course, it poses a big challenge if we are trying to even connect to other countries, right? We cannot even right now connect, I think, internally, and connecting abroad is very complicated right now. And so yeah, we're seeing that in Mexico too.
That's a good point. Go ahead, Sean.
I would just add to what Carolina said that anecdotally, I'm hearing from a lot of site location offices that work to bring companies into locations across Mexico, that they're getting a lot of inquiries and actually a lot of action from companies, especially medium-sized companies that are currently in China that are looking to come into Mexico. So I think companies very often will know where to find those site location people, but it feels like it's Mexico's game to lose at this point. There's a lot of logic to shortening supply chains, more secure supply chains. You couldn't be shorter with Mexico, and especially for technology, there's such an amazing base of engineers and qualified talent across Mexico that there's a lot of good things to sell. But I think a lot of the gravitational pull, as Eric mentioned, will be, oh, we're in China, well, we'll go to Vietnam, or we'll go to Malaysia, maybe we'll go to India. So I think there is a big opportunity, but an equally big challenge for Mexico in actually putting a spotlight on its assets and selling those and enabling companies that may be moving around the world to connect to them.
Maybe somebody can jump in quickly to answer an audience question we received. They ask, innovation still appears linked to population density. Is there evidence that more dispersion of infotech like Starlink will lead to more innovation dispersion across North America? Maybe this gets to some of the people working remotely now after COVID.
I'm happy to just make one quick intervention on that, Stephen, which is I think by and large, obviously, we've talked a lot about the innovative benefits that come from clustering and from the capacity to be near brains and people and suppliers and others. But that's not always necessarily the case. And I would actually bring it back to the question we just answered as well, in terms of, I don't think we can be homogeneous in talking about this across all sectors. Yeah. There are parts of, for instance, the battery innovation ecosystem for which Canada has been relatively successful in some of them that were actually highly dependent on the notion of having a dedicated population stream of workers that were not going to be working for their competitors. And that means that they're actually in places that aren't necessarily your run-of-the-mill kind of expected locations for which we would normally see a site selection person kind of show up. And so I do think we can't kind of paint this all with one brush to say, regardless of whether it's cars or batteries or semis or critical minerals or other goods, that it's going to be one kind of picture. I actually think it's going to be quite different. And, it speaks to some of the things we have to work on in Canada in terms of how do you then service those locations? How do we actually make sure that they're workable? And do they have broadband? Something where we've worked very hard on. And so I would just kind of offer that as a potential consideration.
Excellent. Well, I want to keep us on time. We're just about up. But I do want to ask one final question. Mark, I was really struck by the stat you had that the average U.S. worker was about $19 more productive in terms of contributing to GDP. We wrote a report a couple of years back calling for the United States to articulate a national productivity strategy, kind of a sector by sector approach to bolstering productivity. But maybe the question would be, does Canada need a national productivity strategy specifically? Carolina, you worked in this when you were in Peru on productivity, but maybe just a final set of comments about your thoughts about how we could bolster productivity across North America and our states, and then we'll wrap up.
I'll be super quick, but just to say that the P word in Canada has a long history. And for those of you who follow Canadian policy and politics will know that we've ebbed and flowed as to whether or not we really, really care about it or only care about it a little bit. I'd say we're back to caring about it a lot. But obviously, are linking it to the notion of we really need to drive the expenditure of our businesses in research and development and continuing to invest in products that people want to buy. And I think that's going to be a critical part of our strategy.
Great. Anybody else? Eric, let me give you the last word. What's the most important advice you give to North American policymakers to make this a stronger, more globally competitive regional economy?
One, focus on the advantages that you can get by working together as North America. And so there are interconnections that exist that I think are so often underplayed, and we do not often think in a trilateral context where these things can be realized. But likewise, I think in going to what Mark just said, that innovation is often a very state, provincial, local sort of phenomenon. And I think to the extent that we can get these results out there and disseminate it and make this an annual ongoing exercise, where politicians can say, under my term, we went up 5 points in this index, or somebody who's running against them can say, under this index, you went down 15 points. That's something which is extraordinarily valuable, because what gets measured becomes valued and can be used as a way of trying to constructively push policymakers to make good policy. So you've started something that is very good, and we hope in time will grow into being perhaps something akin to the doing business within North America's subnational region. So keep it up, and it should be time in about 2 months for you to start next year's edition. So rest up.
Very well. All right. Well, with that, Eric, Pat, Mark, Aaron, Sean, and Carolina, let me thank you on behalf of ITIF. I want to also thank more formally Foundation IDEA, McDonald-Laurier Institute, and the Bay Area Economic Council Institute for partnering with us on this report. Thank you in the audience for being with us today. Video of this event will be online by the afternoon, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate with you all on these important policy issues. Thank you so much.